7 years, 7 days, 7 lies. My boyfriend's family thought we were already over. That's how it began, the unraveling of everything I thought I knew. After 7 years together, 7 days of silence and 7 lies whispered behind my back, I discovered that his family had already buried our relationship in their minds. They spoke of me in the past tense, as if I were a chapter closed, a mistake erased, a ghost they no longer had to acknowledge. The words reached me like echoes from another world, but they cut deeper than any direct insult could have. It was as if my existence in his life had been rewritten without my consent, and I was left standing outside the story I had helped build. I remember sitting alone in my room, staring at my phone, waiting for a message that never came. 7 days had passed since we had last spoken properly, and each day stretched longer than the one before. At first I told myself he was busy, that work or stress had pulled him away. But as the silence grew heavier, I began to feel the cracks forming beneath my feet. 7 years of shared laughter, tears, and promises suddenly felt fragile, as though they could be erased in a single week of neglect. The silence wasn't just absence, it was a message, one I was too afraid to read. When I finally heard the whispers, they didn't come from him but from his family. A cousin mentioned casually that they thought we had broken up, that he had told them it was over. My heart stopped. Over? Without a word to me? I laughed it off in front of them, pretending it was a misunderstanding, but inside I was trembling. How could they believe we were finished when I was still here waiting, holding on to the hope that he would call? The betrayal wasn't just in his silence, it was in the lies he had told to make me disappear from their world. The first lie was small, almost harmless on the surface. He told them we were taking a break, a phrase that sounded temporary, almost casual. But the way they repeated it, with finality in their voices, told me he hadn't meant it as temporary at all. Then came the second lie, that I had chosen to walk away, that I had grown tired of him. Hearing that broke something inside me because it wasn't just untrue, it was the opposite of the truth. I had been holding on, waiting, believing in us, while he painted me as the one who had let go. Each lie stacked on top of the last, building a wall between me and the family I had once thought of as my own. They stopped calling, stopped inviting me, stopped acknowledging me. It was as if I had been erased, not just from his life, but from theirs as well. 7 years of birthdays, holidays, and shared meals vanished in an instant, replaced by silence and avoidance. I realized then that lies don't just distort the truth, they rewrite it. And once rewritten, people believe the new version more easily than they ever believed the old one. I sat with the weight of those lies pressing down on me, trying to understand how someone I loved could so easily erase me. 7 years is not a small thing. 7 years is a lifetime of memories, of sacrifices, of building a future together. And yet, in just 7 days, he had managed to undo it all with 7 carefully chosen lies. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. A deliberate act of rewriting our story to suit his convenience. And the worst part was that his family accepted it without question, as though I had never mattered at all. The pain of that realization was sharper than I expected. It wasn't just about losing him. It was about losing the family I had thought I belonged to. For years, I had believed they cared for me, that they saw me as one of their own. But the ease with which they let me go, the way they spoke of me as if I were already gone, showed me the truth. Their loyalty was never to me, it was to him, and whatever version of the story he chose to tell. I was disposable, a character written out of the script without warning. I replayed our last conversations in my mind, searching for clues I had missed. Had he been preparing me for this? Had the silences, the evasions, the distracted looks been signs I ignored? I wanted to believe I had been blind, that I had missed something obvious. Because the alternative was worse, that he had planned this, that he had chosen to let me believe in us while he quietly dismantled everything behind my back. The thought made my stomach twist because it meant the betrayal wasn't sudden, it was deliberate. The hardest part wasn't the lies themselves, but the way they changed how I saw the past. Every memory we had built together now felt tainted, every promise hollow. I wondered if he had ever truly meant the words he said, or if they had always been convenient truths, spoken to keep me close until he no longer needed me. 7 years of love now felt like 7 years of illusion, and I struggled to separate what was real from what had been a performance. The lies didn't just destroy the present, they poisoned the past. And yet, beneath the pain, there was a strange clarity. I realized that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who can hurt us the deepest, not because they hate us, but because they know exactly where to strike. His silence, his lies, his family's acceptance, it all showed me that I had been holding on to something that no longer existed. The unraveling had begun, and though it left me shaken, it also left me free. Because once the truth is revealed, no matter how painful, it cannot be unseen. And I knew then that my story was no longer tied to his lies. For 7 years, our lives were woven together so tightly that I could no longer tell where mine ended and his began. In the beginning, everything felt like a dream. Late-night conversations that stretched until dawn, promises whispered in the dark, and the thrill of knowing we were building something real. I remember the first time he reached for my hand in public, the way his fingers laced through mine as if they belonged there. It was simple, but it felt like the start of forever. Those early days carried a magic that made me believe nothing could ever break us. We built our first apartment together, though apartment was a generous word. It was small, with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, but to us it was a palace. We painted the walls ourselves, laughing when we left streaks of color on each other's clothes. We filled the space with mismatched furniture and secondhand treasures, but it didn't matter, it was ours. Every corner held a memory, every imperfection a story. That little apartment became the foundation of our shared life. Proof that love could make even the simplest place feel like home. Our first trip together was another milestone, one that felt like a declaration of who we were as a couple. We saved for months, cutting corners and skipping luxuries just to afford a few days away. When we finally boarded that bus, our bags packed with more hope than clothes, it felt like freedom. We got lost more than once, argued over directions, and laughed until our stomachs hurt when we ended up in the wrong town. But those moments stitched us closer together, teaching us that even when things went wrong, we could find joy in the chaos. Of course, it wasn't always easy. Our first fight was over something small, something so trivial I can barely remember the details now. But at the time, it felt like the world was ending. I remember the silence that followed, the fear that maybe we weren't as strong as I thought. Yet, when he showed up at my door with an apology, his eyes soft and his voice trembling, I realized that love wasn't about never fighting. It was about choosing each other even after the fights. That lesson carried us through countless storms. Over the years, we built rituals that became the rhythm of our lives. Sunday mornings meant coffee and newspapers, evenings meant cooking together, even if it was just instant noodles. We celebrated small victories with cheap wine and comforted each other through losses with quiet embraces. These routines, simple as they were, gave me a sense of permanence, a belief that we were building something unshakable. They weren't grand gestures, but they were ours, and they made me feel safe. There were sacrifices too, though I never thought of them that way at the time. I gave up opportunities, turned down chances, and rearranged my life to fit the shape of ours. He did the same in his own ways, or so I believed. We told ourselves it was worth it, that every compromise was an investment in the future we were creating together. I never doubted that future, never questioned whether he saw it the same way. 7 years felt like proof enough. We dreamed together, weaving plans for a life that stretched far beyond the present. We talked about the house we would one day buy, the trips we would take, the family we might build. Those dreams were painted in vivid colors, so real that I could almost touch them. I clung to those visions during hard times, reminding myself that the struggles were temporary, that the future we imagined was waiting just ahead. It was that belief that kept me moving forward, even when the road grew rough. His family became part of that dream too. They welcomed me at first, folding me into their celebrations and traditions. I thought of them as my own, and I believed they thought of me the same way. Holidays spent around their table, laughter shared in their living room, it all felt like belonging. I never imagined that one day those same people would erase me so easily, that they would speak of me as if I had never been there at all. Looking back, I see how much of myself I poured into those 7 years. Every decision, every plan, every hope was tied to him. I believed we were unbreakable, that nothing could shake the foundation we had built. I thought love, sacrifice, and shared dreams were enough to protect us from anything. I never considered that the cracks could come from within, that the lies could grow quietly in the spaces I thought were strongest. 7 years is a long time to believe in something, long enough to convince yourself it's permanent. And for me, those years were everything. They were proof of love, of resilience, of a bond I thought could never be undone. But as I would soon learn, permanence is an illusion. Even the strongest foundations can crumble when trust is replaced by silence and love is replaced by lies. He started to grow quieter, and at first I told myself it was nothing. Everyone has bad days, I thought. Everyone gets tired. But the silence between us began to stretch longer than usual, filling the spaces where laughter used to live. He would sit beside me, his body present but his mind far away, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I asked if he was okay, and he would smile faintly, say he was just tired, just busy. I wanted to believe him, so I did. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something was shifting. The conversations that once flowed so easily began to feel forced. I would ask about his day, and his answers grew shorter, clipped, as though he was rationing his words. When I tried to share my own stories, he seemed distracted, nodding at the right times, but never really listening. I told myself it was stress, that work was weighing on him, that he just needed space. But the truth was harder to ignore. The warmth in his voice was fading, replaced by a distance I couldn't bridge. Even the little routines we had built together began to crumble. Our Sunday mornings, once filled with coffee and quiet joy, became mornings where he scrolled endlessly on his phone, barely looking up. Our dinners, once a time to connect, turned into meals eaten in silence, the clinking of cutlery louder than our words. I tried to hold on, to keep the rituals alive, but it felt like I was carrying them alone, dragging the weight of something he no longer wanted to lift. I noticed the way he avoided my eyes. When I spoke, he would glance away, his gaze fixed on the floor, the wall, anywhere but me. It was subtle, but it cut deeper than any argument could. Eye contact had always been our unspoken language, the way we reassured each other without words. Now that connection was gone, and I felt like I was speaking into a void. Still, I told myself it was nothing, that he was just tired, that it would pass. The excuses began to pile up. He was working late, he was too busy, he was too tired. Each excuse sounded reasonable on its own, but together they formed a wall between us. I wanted to believe him, to trust that his distance was temporary, but the wall kept growing higher, and I found myself on the outside staring at a version of him I didn't recognize. I convinced myself that love could survive this, that if I just held on, things would return to normal. Nights became the hardest. He would lie beside me, his body close, but his spirit miles away. I could feel the tension in his shoulders, the way he turned slightly away from me as though even in sleep he needed distance. I reached for him sometimes, hoping he would reach back, but his hand would remain still, his breathing steady, as if he didn't notice. I told myself he was exhausted, that he needed rest, but the emptiness beside me told a different story. I began to question myself. Was I imagining it? Was I being paranoid? I replayed our moments in my head, searching for signs that I had done something wrong. Maybe I had been too demanding, too distracted, too much. I twisted myself into knots trying to explain his distance, always finding reasons that blamed me instead of him. It was easier to believe I was the problem than to face the possibility that he was slipping away. Friends noticed the change too. They asked if everything was okay, if we were still as strong as we used to be. I laughed it off, insisting we were fine, that he was just busy. I became an expert at excuses, repeating the same lines he gave me, convincing others so I could keep convincing myself. But every time I said the words, they felt emptier, like I was trying to hold water in my hands, watching it slip through my fingers. The illusion of stability began to fracture in small, almost invisible ways. A missed call here, a forgotten promise there. Moments that once would have been filled with affection now passed in silence. I clung to the memories of our 7 years together, using them as proof that we were unbreakable. But the present kept reminding me that something was wrong, something I couldn't fix with memories alone. And yet, despite all the signs, I chose to believe in us. I told myself it was stress, that life had simply gotten in the way, that love was stronger than silence. I ignored the cracks, painted over them with hope, and convinced myself the foundation was still solid. But deep down I knew the truth. The cracks were spreading, and no amount of denial could stop them from breaking us apart. The first day of silence felt strange but not alarming. I told myself he was busy, that maybe work had swallowed him whole, as it sometimes did. I sent a message in the morning, a simple, "Good luck today," and waited for the usual reply. Hours passed and nothing came. By evening, I convinced myself he must have been exhausted, that he had fallen asleep early. I went to bed uneasy, but still hopeful that tomorrow would bring the familiar warmth of his words. The second day stretched longer. I called once, twice, 3 times, each attempt ending in the hollow ring of unanswered calls. When he finally replied to a text, it was short, almost dismissive. Sorry, busy. No explanation, no affection, just 2 words that left me more unsettled than silence itself. I stared at the screen, wondering when busy had become enough to replace the conversations that once lasted for hours. By the 3rd day, the excuses began to pile up. He claimed he was swamped with deadlines, that his phone had died, that he had been too tired to talk. Each excuse sounded reasonable on its own, but together they felt rehearsed, like lines from a script meant to keep me at a distance. I wanted to believe him, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. Something was wrong, and I was too afraid to name it. The 4th day was the hardest yet. I woke up with the urge to call him, to hear his voice, to remind myself that we were still us. But when I dialed, the call went unanswered again. I left a message, my voice trembling as I tried to sound casual, but the silence that followed was deafening. I began to wonder if I was the only one still holding on, if he had already let go without telling me. On the 5th day, I tried to distract myself. I filled my hours with work, with friends, with anything that could keep me from staring at my phone. But no matter what I did, my thoughts circled back to him. Every vibration made my heart race, every silence made it sink. When his message finally came, it was another excuse, another vague promise that things would get better soon. But the words felt empty, like placeholders for something he didn't want to say. The 6th day brought a heaviness I couldn't shake. I replayed our last real conversation in my mind, searching for clues I might have missed. Had I said something wrong? Had I pushed too hard? I twisted myself into knots, blaming myself for the distance, even as I knew deep down it wasn't mine to carry. The silence wasn't an accident, it was a choice. And that realization hurt more than any argument ever could. By the 7th day, I felt like a ghost haunting my own relationship. I sent one last message, a simple, "Are we okay?" and waited. Hours passed, then the entire day, and still no reply. The absence was louder than words, heavier than any fight. It was as if he had already decided we were over, but hadn't found the courage to tell me. The dread settled deep in my chest, a weight I couldn't shake. I sat in my room that night staring at the ceiling and realized how fragile everything had become. 7 years of love, of shared dreams, of sacrifices, now balanced on the edge of 7 days of silence. It felt impossible that something so strong could unravel so quickly, and yet here I was, watching it happen in real time. The silence wasn't just absence, it was erasure, a slow and deliberate fading of everything we had built. The hardest part wasn't the unanswered calls or the delayed texts. It was the way the silence made me doubt myself. I began to question my worth, my place in his life, my ability to hold on to something that seemed to be slipping away. I told myself to be patient, to give him time, but patience felt like surrender, and I wasn't sure how much more I could give. As the week ended, I knew something had changed forever. The silence had spoken louder than any words could. It told me I was no longer a priority, no longer part of his world in the way I once was. And though I still clung to hope, I also felt the truth pressing in. Sometimes love doesn't end with a fight or a goodbye. Sometimes it ends with nothing at all, with silence that stretches so long it becomes the only answer you'll ever get. He finally broke the silence on the 8th day. His voice smooth and casual, as if nothing had happened. "Sorry, I've just been buried in work," he said, the words sliding easily off his tongue. I wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the idea that the distance had been nothing more than stress and deadlines. His tone was calm, reassuring even, but something about it felt rehearsed, like a line he had practiced before calling me. Still, I swallowed my doubts and told myself that at least he had reached out. At least he was still here. Later that evening, I decided to take a walk, hoping the cool air would quiet the storm inside me. That's when I saw him, standing outside a cafe, laughing with his family. His mother, his sister, even a cousin I hadn't seen in months were gathered around him, their faces lit with warmth. He looked relaxed, carefree, nothing like the man who had just told me he was drowning in work. For a moment I froze, my heart thudding in my chest, unable to process what I was seeing. It wasn't the fact that he was with them that hurt. It was the lie. He could have told me the truth, could have said he needed time with his family, and I would have understood. But instead, he chose to erase me from that moment, to keep me at a distance with a story that wasn't real. The lie was small, almost harmless on the surface, but it cut deep because it revealed something I hadn't wanted to admit. He no longer trusted me with the truth. I stood there, half hidden in the shadows, watching him laugh as though the last 7 days of silence had never happened. My chest tightened, not just with hurt, but with confusion. Why lie about something so simple? Why pretend to be buried in work when he was surrounded by the very people who had once welcomed me into their lives? The questions swirled in my mind, each one heavier than the last, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. When I finally walked away, my steps felt heavy as though I was dragging the weight of that lie behind me. I replayed his words in my head, the easy way he had said them, the calmness in his voice. It wasn't just the lie itself. It was how effortlessly it had come, how natural it seemed for him to bend the truth. That realization scared me more than the silence ever had. Later, when he called again, his voice was warm, almost affectionate, as if he was trying to make up for the distance. He asked about my day, told me he missed me, and for a moment I almost let myself believe him. But the image of him laughing with his family while I sat alone replayed in my mind, and the words felt hollow. I answered politely, but inside something had shifted. A thread had been pulled, and I could feel the fabric of our trust beginning to unravel. I didn't confront him right away. Part of me wanted to, but another part was afraid of what I might hear. What if the lie was bigger than I thought? What if this was just the beginning? So I stayed quiet, carrying the truth like a secret, testing the weight of it in my chest. But silence doesn't erase betrayal. It only deepens it. And with every passing hour, the lie grew sharper, cutting into me in ways I couldn't ignore. I thought about the 7 years we had spent together, about the promises we had made, and wondered how easily they could be undone by something so small. A single lie shouldn't have the power to destroy trust, but it did, because it wasn't just about the words. It was about the choice. He had chosen to deceive me, to keep me outside of his world, even when there was no reason to. That choice told me more than any excuse ever could. The next time I saw him, I searched his face for answers. I looked for guilt, for hesitation, for any sign that he knew what he had done. But he smiled at me the way he always had, his eyes steady, his voice calm. If he felt any shame, he hid it well. And that was when I realized the most painful truth. The lie wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, and it was easy for him. That night, as I lay awake, I understood that this was only the beginning. Lies don't come alone. They travel in packs, each one paving the way for the next. The first lie was small, but it had already begun to unravel the trust we had built over 7 years. And though I wanted to believe it was just a mistake, deep down I knew the truth. Once a thread is pulled, the whole fabric can come undone. The first lie had been about work, but it didn't stop there. Soon the excuses multiplied, each one carefully crafted to keep me at a distance. He told me he was too tired to meet, yet I later learned he had gone out with friends. He said he was traveling for business, but a mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing him in town the very same night. Each discovery was like a pinprick, small on its own, but together they began to bleed me dry. I wanted to believe him, but the evidence kept piling up, and with it, the uneasy truth that he was no longer the man I thought I knew. The second lie came when he told me his family was asking about me, that they missed me, that they hoped to see me soon. I clung to those words, grateful for the reassurance, until I overheard his cousin at a gathering say, "It's a shame they broke up. We thought they were good together." My heart sank. Broke up? I hadn't left. I hadn't even been told it was over. That was when I realized he had been feeding them a different story, one where I had already been erased. The third lie was about a dinner. He told me he was working late, but photos surfaced online of him smiling at a family table, surrounded by the very people who now believed I was gone. I stared at those pictures for hours, my chest tight with disbelief. It wasn't just that he had lied about where he was, it was that he had chosen to live a version of life where I no longer existed, and he seemed comfortable in it. The fourth lie was crueler in its simplicity. He told me he had spoken about me fondly, that he had defended me when his family questioned our relationship. But when I finally gathered the courage to ask his sister directly, Her expression was one of confusion. "He said you two ended things weeks ago," she replied, her voice soft but firm. The words hit me like a blow. He hadn't defended me, he had buried me. The fifth lie came wrapped in affection. He told me he loved me, that nothing had changed, that I was imagining the distance. His voice was warm, his words sweet, but they rang hollow against the silence of the past days and the whispers I had already heard. Love, I realized, isn't just spoken, it's lived. And his actions told a story that contradicted every word he said. The sixth lie was about the future. He promised we would take a trip together soon, that he was planning something special for us. I wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to the hope that we still had a future. But when I mentioned it later, he brushed it off, claiming he never said such a thing. It was as if he was rewriting conversations in real time, gaslighting me into questioning my own memory. The seventh lie was the final crack in the foundation. He told me his family respected me, that they still saw me as part of their circle. But by then, I had already heard the truth from their own mouths. To them I was gone, a chapter closed, a name no longer spoken with warmth. They weren't cruel about it, they simply believed what he had told them. And in that belief I saw the depth of his betrayal. He hadn't just lied to me. He had rewritten me out of his life entirely. Each lie was a brick, and together they built a wall between us so high I could no longer see the man I had loved for 7 years. I pressed my hands against that wall, searching for cracks, for any way to break through, but all I found was cold stone. He had chosen deception over honesty, erasure over confrontation. And his family, whether knowingly or not, had become part of that wall, reinforcing it with every word they spoke in the past tense. The weight of those lies wasn't just in their number, it was in their pattern. They weren't random, careless slips. They were deliberate, each one designed to create distance, to push me out without ever having to face me directly. It was a coward's way of ending things, but it was effective. By the time I pieced it all together, I realized I was already gone in his world, even though I was still standing there, waiting for him to tell me the truth. And that was the cruelest part of all. I hadn't been given the dignity of an ending. Instead, I had been erased quietly, replaced by a story that suited him better. 7 years of love undone by 7 days of silence and 7 lies told with ease. And as I stood in the wreckage of what we once had, I understood that the man I loved no longer existed. Not because he had left me, but because he had chosen to bury me in lies. I didn't hear it from him. I heard it in the way his family spoke when they thought I wasn't listening. I had gone to a gathering, hesitant but hopeful, thinking maybe the distance between us was only in my head. But as I stood in the hallway, just out of sight, I caught the words that froze me in place. "It's good he's moving on," his aunt whispered. 7 years is long enough. He deserves a fresh start. My chest tightened, the air suddenly too heavy to breathe. They weren't talking about us as though we were struggling. They were talking about us as though we were already over. The shock of it was sharp, like a slap. I wanted to step into the room, to correct them, to say, "I'm still here, we're still together." But the truth was I wasn't sure anymore. Their words carried a certainty that I didn't have, a conviction that came from something he must have told them. And in that moment, I realized the betrayal wasn't just his silence or his lies. It was the way he had rewritten our story for everyone else, leaving me as the only one still clinging to the truth. Later, his cousin pulled me aside, her voice low and careful, as if she were delivering bad news. "I thought you two had ended things," she said, her eyes wide with confusion. "That's what he told us." The words landed like stones in my stomach. He hadn't just let them assume. We were over in his version of events. He had erased me so completely that even the people who once called me family now looked at me like a stranger who didn't belong. I thought back to the holidays spent around their table. The laughter, the warmth, the way they had once welcomed me as one of their own. Those memories felt like lies now too. Because if they had truly cared, wouldn't they have asked me? Wouldn't they have given me the chance to speak for myself? Instead, they accepted his story without question, replacing me in their minds with the idea of someone better, someone more fitting for him. The whispers grew sharper the more I listened. "He wasted too much time already," one voice said. "He deserves someone who can give him more." Another chimed in. "She was never the right match. This is for the best." Each word cut deeper, not just because of what they said, but because of how easily they dismissed me. 7 years of shared history, of love and sacrifice, reduced to nothing more than a mistake in their eyes. I wanted to scream, to demand how they could erase me so easily, how they could speak of me as though I had never mattered. But I stayed silent, rooted to the spot, my heart pounding in my ears. The betrayal wasn't just his, it was theirs too. They had once embraced me, called me family, but now they spoke of me as though I were a ghost, a shadow that had already faded from their lives. When I finally saw him that night, I searched his face for answers. Did he know what they were saying? Did he care? He smiled at me, casual, as though nothing had changed, but I could see the truth in his eyes. He had let them believe it. He had chosen to let me be erased, to let them speak of me in the past tense while I was still standing there, still fighting for us. The weight of that realization was unbearable. It wasn't just that he had lied to me, it was that he had lied about me. He had taken my place in his life and handed it to silence, to whispers, to the idea of someone else. And his family, the people I had once trusted, had accepted it without hesitation. Their loyalty was to him, not to the truth, and certainly not to me. I left that night feeling hollow, as though I had been cut out of my own story. The laughter from the living room followed me out the door, a cruel reminder that life was moving on without me, that I had already been replaced in their minds. I wasn't just losing him, I was losing all of them too. And as I walked away, I realized the deepest betrayal wasn't in the lies he told me, but in the way he had convinced everyone else to believe them. I had been erased not just from his heart, but from the world we had built together. And the silence of his family, their easy acceptance of my absence, told me everything I needed to know. I was no longer part of their story. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The weight of the silence, the lies, the whispers from his family, it all pressed against my chest until I felt like I would suffocate if I didn't speak. So I called him, my voice sharper than I intended, and told him we needed to talk face to face. When he arrived, he looked calm, almost casual, as though nothing had happened. That calmness only fueled my anger. I stared at him, my hands trembling, and asked the question that had been burning inside me. Why did you tell them we were over? For a moment he froze. His eyes flickered, his mouth opened and closed, and I could see the panic ripple across his face. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair, and said the words I had dreaded but expected. I didn't want to deal with their disapproval. It was easier to let them think it was done. His voice was low, almost apologetic, but the cowardice in it was unmistakable. He hadn't just lied to me. He had lied about me, and he had done it because it was easier than standing up for us. I felt my chest tighten, my breath catching as the truth settled in. 7 years of love, of sacrifice, of building a life together, and he had erased it all with a shrug, with a story told to make his life simpler. Easier for you, I said, my voice trembling with fury. Do you have any idea what it's been like for me? To hear them talk about me as if I'm already gone? To realize you let them erase me without even telling me? My words came out like broken glass, sharp and jagged, but I didn't care. He tried to reach for me, his voice softening as though gentleness could undo the damage. I didn't mean to hurt you, I didn't want to fight with them. You know how they are. They never really approved, and I thought if I told them it was over, it would keep the peace. His explanation was worse than the lie itself. He hadn't done it to protect me. He had done it to protect himself. He had chosen their comfort over my dignity, their approval over our truth. I pulled back, shaking my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. So you let them think I was gone, just like that? You let them erase me from your life because you didn't want to argue? My voice cracked, but my anger held steady. 7 years and you couldn't even defend me. You couldn't even tell them the truth. The words hung between us, heavy and final, and for the first time, I saw him clearly, not as the man I had loved, but as the man he truly was. His eyes dropped to the floor, his shoulders slumping under the weight of my words. He didn't deny it. He didn't fight for me. He just stood there, silent, as though silence could shield him from the truth. That silence told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't strong enough to stand beside me. He wasn't brave enough to fight for us. And he never had been. I thought of all the times I had defended him, all the times I had stood by him when others doubted us. I thought of the sacrifices I had made, the dreams I had reshaped to fit the life we were building together. And now, faced with the first real test of loyalty, he had chosen the easy way out. He had chosen them over me, comfort over courage, lies over love. The room felt colder as I stepped back, putting distance between us. My heart ached, but beneath the ache was clarity. I had spent 7 years believing in a man who couldn't even tell the truth when it mattered most. I had built my life around someone who would rather erase me than defend me. And now, standing in front of him, I realized that the man I thought I knew had never truly existed. He whispered my name, his voice breaking, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. His cowardice had spoken louder than any apology ever could. I turned away, my body trembling, my heart breaking, but my mind clear. For the first time, I saw him not as my partner, not as my love, but as a stranger who had chosen lies over loyalty. And in that moment, I understood that the confrontation wasn't just about the lies, it was about the truth I had been too afraid to face. He had never been willing to fight for me, and no matter how much I had loved him, no matter how much I had sacrificed, I couldn't fight for someone who wouldn't even stand beside me. I sat alone that night, the echoes of our confrontation still ringing in my ears, and I thought about the 7 years I had given him. 7 years of laughter, of sacrifice, of building a life together brick by brick. 7 years of believing that love was enough to carry us through anything. And yet, all it had taken was 7 days of silence and 7 lies spoken with ease to unravel it all. The math of it was cruel, almost mocking. Years of devotion undone by a single week of betrayal. The pain of that realization was sharp, cutting through me with every memory that surfaced. I thought of the nights we had stayed up dreaming about our future, the mornings we had shared coffee in quiet comfort, the promises whispered in the dark. Each memory now felt poisoned, tainted by the knowledge that while I had been holding on, he had already been letting go. It was like looking at a photograph that had once brought joy, only to see the cracks spreading across its surface. But as the pain pressed down on me, something else began to rise. Clarity. I saw with a sharpness I had never allowed myself before that love without honesty is no love at all. What good were 7 years of shared history if they could be rewritten with lies? What good was affection if it was paired with cowardice? I had mistaken endurance for strength, mistaking my ability to forgive and overlook for proof that we were unbreakable. But the truth was simpler and harsher. Love cannot survive without truth. I realized then that I had been fighting for a version of us that no longer existed. I had been clinging to the memory of who we once were, blind to the reality of who he had become. The silence, the lies, the way he let his family erase me. It wasn't just weakness, it was a choice. He had chosen the easier path, the one that spared him conflict but cost me my dignity. And in that choice, he revealed himself more clearly than he ever had before. The weight of those 7 years pressed against me, begging me to stay, to keep fighting, to salvage what was left. But the clarity cut through that weight, reminding me that time invested is not the same as love returned. I could not measure my worth in years spent, nor could I justify staying in a love that no longer honored me. The past was not enough to save the present, and the present was already gone. I thought of the lies one by one, each a thread pulled from the fabric of trust. The first had been small, almost harmless, but by the 7th, the fabric was in tatters. Trust once broken cannot be patched together with apologies. It requires honesty, and honesty was the one thing he had refused to give me. Without it, the foundation of our love had crumbled, leaving nothing but dust and memories. The clarity was painful, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I saw the truth without excuses, without denial. I saw that I deserved more than silence, more than lies, more than a love that existed only when it was convenient. I deserved someone who would fight for me, who would speak the truth even when it was hard, who would never let me be erased. And he was not that person. The breaking point wasn't a single moment. It was the accumulation of all the moments that had led here. The silence that stretched too long, the lies that stacked too high, the cowardice that revealed itself too clearly. Together, they formed a truth I could no longer ignore. The man I had loved for 7 years was gone, and the love I had believed in had never been as strong as I thought. I sat with that truth, letting it settle into me, and though it hurt, it also steadied me. The pain was sharp, but the clarity was sharper. I knew then that I could not go back, could not pretend, could not rebuild what had already been destroyed. The breaking point had come, and with it the end of us. And as I closed my eyes, I whispered the words I had been too afraid to say out loud. Love without honesty is no love at all. It was both a farewell and a promise to myself. A farewell to the man I had once loved, and a promise that I would never again settle for a love built on silence and lies. I walked away that night, my steps unsteady, but my resolve firm. The air outside felt colder than I remembered, sharp against my skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled inside me. Behind me was the life I had built for 7 years, a life I had believed was unshakable, and yet it had crumbled in less than a week. My heart ached with every step, but I knew I couldn't turn back. Some doors, once closed, are never meant to be opened again. The silence of the street was almost comforting, a stark contrast to the noise of lies and excuses that had filled the last few days. I thought about the way he had looked at me, not with love, not even with regret, but with the weary eyes of someone who had already let go long before I realized it. That was the deepest cut, not the lies themselves, but the ease with which he had allowed me to be erased, as though I had never mattered at all. I replayed the words I had overheard from his family, the whispers of better matches and fresh starts. They had spoken of me in the past tense, as if I were a ghost haunting a story that had already ended. And he had let them. He had stood by silently while they buried me in absence, while they rewrote our history without me. That silence was louder than any confession, more damning than any excuse. 7 years. That number echoed in my mind like a drumbeat. 7 years of love, of sacrifice, of believing in a future that no longer existed. And then 7 days of silence, 7 lies spoken with ease, enough to undo it all. The symmetry of it was cruel, almost poetic, but it carried a truth I could no longer ignore. Time invested does not guarantee loyalty, and love without honesty is nothing but an illusion. I thought of the person I had been at the start of those 7 years, hopeful, trusting, willing to give everything. That version of me had believed in forever, had believed that love could conquer anything. But the person walking away now was different. I was scarred, yes, but I was also stronger. I had learned that sometimes the hardest battles are not with strangers, but with the people you trust most. And sometimes the only way to win is to walk away. The pain was sharp, but beneath it was a strange sense of freedom. I no longer had to wait for calls that never came, no longer had to explain away lies that didn't deserve excuses. I no longer had to fight for a place in a story where I had already been written out. The loss was real, but so was the clarity. And clarity, I realized, was worth more than false comfort. As I walked further, I let the memories wash over me one last time. The laughter, the dreams, the promises. They were beautiful once, but they no longer belonged to me. They belonged to a past that had been rewritten, to a love that had been buried under silence and lies. I released them, not because I wanted to, but because holding on would only keep me chained to a ghost. The betrayal would always sting, but I knew it would not define me. What defined me was the choice I made in that moment. To leave, to protect my dignity, to choose myself over someone who had chosen lies. It was not the ending I had imagined, but it was the ending I needed. And sometimes that is enough. 7 years can be undone in 7 days. 7 lies can reveal a truth you were never meant to ignore. That truth was painful, but it was also liberating. It showed me that love without honesty is no love at all, and that sometimes the greatest act of strength is knowing when to walk away, and so I did. Shaken, yes. Heartbroken, yes. But resolute. Because in the end, I realized that the deepest betrayal wasn't in the lies themselves. It was in the ease with which he allowed me to be erased. And I refused to let myself be erased any longer.